Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, live today on May the 20th. I have another round of stories to get to on today's episode to start off the week. We'll continue our weekly series, or our daily series, I should say, on the quarterback rankings going division by division. This time we'll focus in on the NFC South. Then we're going to talk about the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence reportedly being close to agreeing on a contract extension around the $50 million mark. I'll get into more of the details on that. Plus, this year on the primetime schedule, there will be no Eagles versus Dallas Cowboys matchup, the first time in over a decade that happens. So I'll give you the reasons why that is and whether or not I agree with it or if I find it a little bit ridiculous. So stay tuned for that. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And also, before I start on the rankings, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or you want to make any comments on today's episode, use the tip and donations link, GSMCpodcast.net, that you see on your screen. By using this link, your question or comment will pop up in my chat box. I'll read it on air, and that way I'll get your guys' perspective on anything I say or anything we're going over with any of the topics. It's a massive help for the show, and also we greatly appreciate it anytime you guys are able to do that. So again, the tip and donations link is GSMCpodcast.net. And without further ado, I will move on to the rankings. Like I mentioned, we're going to continue on with the daily rankings of these quarterbacks per division. And we're going to stick into the NFC South. Pretty difficult one. I won't lie with how I ranked them, going from 4 all the way to 1. The 4 through 3 were pretty easy, but then the top 2 were a bit of a toss-up. But I will get into it and start off with the number 4 overall spot. Bryce Young, really no surprise here. Coming off of his first year, 2-15 record, so a pretty poor start to his career. But the biggest point I wanted to make with Bryce Young is that this is the perfect situation that I mentioned, the epitome of drafting a quarterback just because teams feel the need to draft one. I know you get the first overall pick a few years back or 2 years back now, and you know the pressure on you to draft a quarterback to try and flip this whole organization around is a lot. I do know that and acknowledge that, but again, drafting him, only really having Adam Thielen there as an option to throw to, you have Miles Sanders in the backfield as well as Chuba Hubbard, new offensive or new head coach I should say, and then you throw him in behind a line that isn't the greatest. On top of that, it was never going to be a great situation, and you compare it now to what Caleb Williams is stepping into, it's night and day. There's really no comparison, and on top of that, I won't bash Bryce Young. You know, that's more on the Carolina Panthers for not being ready to draft him in his rookie season. But regardless of that, you know, he threw for nearly 3,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, again with a lack of skill set players on the outside. And they were all right, but then again, you know, it's nothing compared to, you hate to compare him to CJ Stroud, but he went in the top 2 as well, and you see the kind of season that he had. It's not unfortunate, but it is just how the cards were dealt. So those comparisons will always be made. And just continuing on also with Bryce Young as a quarterback, you know, a lot of skepticism is made or has been brought on to Bryce Young for his size. You know, he's only 5'10", and that is something that is worth pointing out, but at the same time, his talent, I think, supersedes that. It just might require a bit more skill set and a lot more protection than it might for a guy that's 6'4", 6'3", type of quarterback that can withstand those hits. But then again, the talent is off the charts, and now they've done a better job of supporting him, bringing in guys like Deontay Johnson, drafting Jonathan Brooks, bringing massive pieces on the offensive line in Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis as well. So they're now starting to get it, but because of what we've seen on tape, Bryce Young will be in there at the number 4 spot. And moving on down the list, we get to number 3 in Derek Carr. Stuck pretty much, as it says on the screen there, at about average, 9-8 season this past year, with Alvin Kamara serving that suspension, is pretty noteworthy. It is pretty, not remarkable, but but missing one of your best pieces on offense, on top of not already having as many options as the Falcons, the Buccaneers, as well in your division. That is that is something to worth noting, and it is something to acknowledge there for Derek Carr. But at the same time, again, it is a situation where the team is built around Derek Carr, where they don't really help him as much. You only really have Chris Olave there. Rashid Shaheed was also a nice find there to add to that offense, but Michael Thomas rarely showed up. Then he got hurt. So then you really only have Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara when he came back, and it just wasn't enough to compete in that division. Although, in saying that, he nearly threw for 4,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. So, again, it's all right. Those are solid numbers if the rest of the team and just the coaching staff and the rest of the organization was on par. That defense is formidable, but it is getting a little bit older. So if your offense isn't really scoring, it's not really clicking, you get these average records, 9-8, around the wild card spots, and you might miss it more often than not. And it is a shame to see, because since that 2016 season when he just played off the charts and had a good case, I thought, for the MVP until he I want to say he broke his leg, or it was his ankle or something like that. That really derailed everything. He made the playoffs with the Raiders, but he didn't end up playing in that game. And since then, having that 12-3 record in 2016, he hasn't had a better record since 10-7. Sticking around that average mark for Derek Carr. And then you look at him now and projecting later on in his career. He is 33 years old, so it's kind of hard to think then he's going to produce anything more than what you're seeing already on the field. And also athletically, extending plays, that is sort of starting to dwindle down a little bit because of his age. And just like the team around him, as he gets older, is going to need more help to produce at a better level. But the Saints right now, I think, aren't at a position to really do that because of their salary cap situation and things like that. So, he slides in there at number 3 for me. Not the worst, but it could definitely get better for Derek Carr and the Saints. And now it's where it gets a little tricky, and it gets a little tough for me, because I thought this was going to be pretty easy, but it turned up being a little bit harder than I anticipated. At number 2, a surprise, if depending on where you stand as a fan, Kirk Cousins, the number 2 ranked quarterback for me in the NFC South, just because of that injury. And there's a few more reasons, obviously. The injury's the biggest one. 35 years old, coming off of an Achilles injury. He's going to be 36 years old in August, so that's also something that not a lot of people know, or that they will point to. How will he adjust to a new division, a new team, new head coach, new offensive coordinator? All of that takes reps. He is on a good trajectory in his recovery, but at the same time, how will he fit into this Falcons team? I think they're going to be good. They have a great team, but that uncertainty is one point. And also, drafting Michael Penix at number 8 says something to me that a lot of other teams, don't have to face that situation. With Michael Penix, drafting him, you have to have a level of doubt in Kirk Cousins to draft a quarterback at that spot. Past the age, there is that injury, that injury that he's coming off of. So having that doubt, it is in your mind if you're going to draft a quarterback so high as the Falcons did. And also, just going forward, how much more room does he have left to really improve on what you've seen already? And off of that point, talking about how I base these rankings off of, accomplishments, physical traits, extendability, creating those off-script plays. How much more of that can he create at 35 years old? And also, just on the accomplishments, you have a great regular season. He is a great player to get you probably to the playoffs with the level of talent the Falcons have. But on top of that, when you get to the playoffs, he is 1-4 in those playoffs. And it's not like he's had awful teams and he's had to carry them over the line a bunch of times. He's had pretty solid teams. The most noteworthy one is the one against the Giants where they lost, and they had a pretty solid team at home, but you lose that game and it doesn't leave a good taste in a lot of people's mouths. And, a 1-4 record is actually worse than Dak Prescott's, and a lot of people won't stop bashing Dak Prescott and the Cowboys because obviously they are the Cowboys, but because of Dak, they bash him for his playoff record, and Kirk Cousins has one that's just a little bit worse than him, so that's something else to point to. But they have a better team now than what he did with the Vikings, I should say. But at the same time, having Michael Penix come in makes me think that he's going to play sooner rather than later, and because of that, I have him as my number 2 ranked quarterback in the NFC South, but he might not even be the starting quarterback for the entirety of this season. So there's a lot of doubt there. It just doesn't leave a good taste in my mouth, so I have him in at number 2. And then with the number 1 spot, obviously, it does fall to Baker Mayfield because of that recency bias. I do acknowledge that a little bit. Coming off of the best year of his career in 2013, posting 64% completion percentage, over 4,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. Just won the NFC South division in his first year there. And now he's entering a period, this win now period for the Buccaneers, because he is 29 years old. He just got that contract extension with the Buccaneers, and they were able to bring back a lot of weapons for him to kind of build that chemistry there even more, with Mike Evans being re-signed as well. So that paints a better picture for me. Defensively, I think they're a little bit better than the Falcons, just have a better pass rush, and the secondary is a question mark for me, but I think overall, balance-wise, I also didn't like how the Falcons didn't really address the defense in the first round. I know they addressed it the next 4 rounds after that, but I'd have to just see it on the field. Right now we're in May, so there's not really too much to base it off of. But on top of that, sticking with Baker, he's very similar to Kirk if you really think about it and look at it. Finding success late in their careers with the Vikings and Kirk Cousins situation, and now Baker Mayfield with the Buccaneers. Getting to the playoffs also is something else. Baker has played in one less game than Kirk Cousins in the playoffs, but he has a little bit of a better winning record. They both have made it only to the divisional round, but Baker has made it there twice, and Kirk has obviously only made it there once, hence the 1-4 record. And also, this is a quarterback ranking for right now and probably going forward. So a 29-year-old Baker Mayfield coming off of the best year of his career just paints a better picture for me than a Kirk Cousins that is right now in a loop, a quarterback battle, if you want to call it that, with Michael Penix and obviously Derek Carr and Bryce Young. Baker, there's no question he's a quarterback there. They're doing everything to make him succeed. They're coming off of winning that division, and I think they have a chance of doing it again. They're going to face more competition, obviously, from the Falcons. But it is going to be a good battle to see there towards really the whole year, because they have the easiest schedules in the NFL. So how they maneuver with injuries and stuff like that should be something to keep an eye out for. But that's my list. Let me know what you guys think about it throughout the duration of this show or in the comments section afterwards, if I got the order right, or if you guys just think I'm crazy for having the order as I do. Leave it all down in the comments below. But in saying that, we will be moving on with the rest of the show. Next up is Trevor Lawrence and his contract negotiations with the Jacksonville Jaguars, plus the Eagles and Cowboys matchup not being on prime time for the first time since 2006. And we're also going to talk about the Steelers schedule and how difficult it is down the stretch there in 2024. So stick around. A lot more to talk about on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind.
moving right along with the show and into the second topic, more quarterback contract extension talks on today's show. This time focusing in on Trevor Lawrence and his contract negotiations with the Jacksonville Jaguars. This offseason, the Jaguars picked up Trevor Lawrence's fifth-year option along with Travis Etienne, and Lawrence will actually be playing on the last year of his rookie deal before he plays on that fifth-year deal that the Jaguars picked up. So there is still room there to not have to do an extension this offseason, but according to ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, as he reported this past weekend, the Jaguars and Lawrence are in contract talks over an extension that would pay him around $50 million annually. The totality of the deal and how many years it will be is yet to be disclosed, but that is the supposed amount that he'd get per year. $50 million isn't the highest paying, won't reset the market, but it is certainly interesting because it now pops up the question of, for me, is $50 million enough for Trevor Lawrence as an extension? It seems like every contract extension that happens recently now is close to resetting the market or does reset the quarterback market. We haven't had one of those deals in a while. Joe Burrow is still the highest paid annual paid quarterback in the NFL, earning $55 million per year. So deals have come close, most notably Jared Goff getting his extension recently. I forget how many years it was, but he's getting $53 million per year, making him the second highest paid quarterback in the NFL on a year-to-year basis. So that could be what Trevor Lawrence follows up on, $50 million compared to $53 million. Is that how people thought it would play out? That's a question I have in mind. But going deeper into the facts about the story, Trevor Lawrence spoke about his contract negotiations a little bit last month, to which he said, "I love where we're going as an organization, and I feel like I'm just getting better every year. My best ball is definitely ahead of me, so from that standpoint, obviously, yeah, that would be great." Referencing a contract extension would be great, obviously, and where he pointed out in his statement, saying that he just feels like he's getting better every year. You look at the trajectory that he has gotten through his years, in his first year getting drafted to the Jaguars, obviously, with Urban Meyer there. I'm pretty sure everybody knows how that season went, not just on the field, but off the field. With Urban Meyer, that was never really going to work from the moment it all started. That was a bad rookie season then. He made his first Pro Bowl and was played very well in 2022, won the AFC South division as well, and also made the playoffs and had that great comeback win against the Los Angeles Chargers in the wild card round before getting eliminated in the divisional round. But to follow that rookie season through all the twists and turbulation that he had to go through and have the year that he did in 2022, I think says a lot for him. But then again, in 2023, you saw the start that they had. They were actually the number one seed in the AFC for a while to start the year, and then it started slowing down a little bit. Then you had to deal with injuries, and they lost, I forget how many games towards the end. They might have lost 6 out of their last 7 or 6 out of their last 8 or something like that to miss the playoffs completely, and that recency bias, obviously, again, stays in your mind a lot longer than all the success that he had in 2022. With a supposed better team in 2023 also doesn't help his case. So there is some good, and there's definitely some odd plays, some odd years with Trevor Lawrence in the NFL. But mostly, personally, I think it's been not as you would like a number one pick to play, obviously, because when you draft a guy number one overall, just look at how the media and everybody talks about Caleb Williams, generational, much like they did with Trevor Lawrence, coming in, changing an organization. And I think Trevor Lawrence has done that to some extent, but at number one overall, I think most people, and I don't think they're crazy for doing this, is they think not MVP conversation, but sort of like CJ Stroud had his rookie year. I think people tailor it more to those expectations, and it is fair, not fair, realistic, unrealistic. That's for anybody to make that determination. But when you're getting drafted that high, for me, I don't think it's that wild, out of the realm of logic to think that if you're the number one pick in the entire draft to be in that sort of situation, in those sort of conversations. And of course, it all depends on the situation that you get drafted to. Like I just mentioned with Urban Meyer being there and the Jaguars, it didn't really work out for Trevor Lawrence, but with Doug Peterson coming in, it has taken a little bit longer for them to be around the playoff mark and really be a prominent figure. But I like the direction that Doug Peterson has them going. This next year, I think, will be huge, especially if they get to this contract extension, which is the main topic on today's segment. $50 million annually for him. If he does get that, it would make him the sixth quarterback to be paid at least $50 million or more in the NFL. And again, around $50 million for me as my final verdict seems like the right amount for Trevor Lawrence. Like I just listed off, he hasn't done enough to merit resetting the market or being the second highest paid quarterback, jumping over Jared Goff, to where he has been, number one overall pick, taking the Jaguars from where they were to where they are now, along with Doug Peterson, and showing that growth and development. Like he pointed out in his statement, I think he does deserve to be paid among the top because, in all honesty, if he wasn't on the Jaguars and the Jaguars were dealing with any other quarterback that they might have picked up through free agency or try to trade through and just sort of try to put a bandage over that position, I think they'd be in a much different spot than they are now. They have their quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. I believe in him, but seeing some of the negatives and seeing some of the positives as well, I think $50 million is the sweet spot around what you'd want for Trevor Lawrence based on what he's shown you right now. And also, it is interesting because this extends further to all the other quarterbacks trying to get an extension. If the Jaguars do pull this off, they not only would have jumped Dak Prescott, obviously, because that is still the ongoing saga, but like we talked about last week, Tua Tagovailoa looking for a contract extension. It was reported, I think, today that they've had those discussions and that Tua actually rejected the first offer from the Dolphins, so that's not a great sign. But if, say, Trevor Lawrence jumps Tua, jumps Dak, and also Matthew Stafford's in that boat as well as, forgetting the name, Jordan Love is in there, but he just became extension eligible. But, he is in the realm of starting to get those negotiations going. But really the main three are Dak, Tua, and Matthew Stafford also as well, looking to get a contract extension to assure himself some more guarantees past 2024. If Trevor Lawrence now jumps those two, I think it could get very interesting for the Dolphins, not only because Tua has already reportedly rejected their first offer, but also with the Cowboys, how does that figure in to their plans on trying to extend Dak? Maybe CD now jumps ahead of Dak. If they wait any longer, the price could go up more and more. Maybe they figure extending CD is in their best interest at this moment because of how the market is going. And then maybe they get lucky in free agency. Probably not, but that is something to take into consideration when trying to extend your quarterback. It is just becoming a race to see who gets their quarterback extended the quickest. And the Jaguars are on it right now. Doug Peterson also had some comments today that their general manager and Trevor Lawrence's entourage are also really trying hard to figure out an extension. So it seems like everything's trending in the right direction. And if they do get it done, because they picked up that fifth-year option, they would have that extra year as a bonus onto however long they figure out the extension to be. So say they have a 4-year extension, they still have that fifth-year option there. So it really turns out to be almost like a 5-year deal, sort of like the Devontae Smith deal when they picked up his fifth-year option and then they extended him 3 more years. I think that's a great way of going about it. If you have that extra year, you might as well throw it on there and have the extension after that. Keep him on the team a lot longer. But I anticipate this probably getting done in this offseason. I would say, it is a report right now that they're in the talks of getting this done, but I think a lot of people didn't expect it to get done this offseason. But now with how positive it seems like it's going, Doug Peterson commenting on it recently, or just today I should say, at the beginning of their OTA portion of their offseason, it seems like it's trending in a more positive direction than the Dolphins. And the Cowboys that just seem to be inactive right now in any negotiation talks at the moment for their quarterback. So let me know what you guys think again in the comment section. Do you guys think $50 million is too much, too little for Trevor Lawrence? And whether or not the Jaguars will get it done in this offseason. Leave all your thoughts in the live chat box or also in the comment section after this episode is finalized. But in the meantime, we will move on with the rest of the show. We'll talk about the Eagles and the Cowboys matchup not being on primetime this year. Stay tuned to find out my thoughts on that, and also talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers schedule in 2024 and how difficult it is in their final 8 games, plus the Ravens, another AFC North team, not happy with their overall schedule as well in 2024. Stick around to find out more details on those stories. We'll be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Moving right along with today's episode and the third segment on the agenda, talking more NFL schedule. This time a primetime matchup that is usually on primetime, I should say. The Eagles and the Cowboys. Mostly a must-see game, I would assume, in terms of NFL rivalries, divisional rivalries, along with, the Steelers and the Ravens. I'm trying to think here off the top of my head. This one just jumps right at the top of the list, really, in the NFC East. Giants, Eagles, Giants, Cowboys, Cowboys, Eagles, Cowboys, Giants. It's all really mixed in there into the top rivalries in the NFL, really just right off the bat for me. In the NFC North, I guess, really with Rodgers being there, it hasn't really been much of a rivalry, but also you could throw them in there. But right at the top of the list is this game, and I would assume that every year the NFL would want to have it as a primetime game, but this year it's not the case. For the first time since 2006, the Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys won't be playing either other games on Monday Night Football or on Sunday Night Football, and on top of that, it's also the first time these two won't be playing in a standalone game, meaning a Thursday night, an international game or something like that, where it is the only game on at the moment since 2003. So you might be wondering, when are they playing? Well, if you haven't seen each of the team's schedule, both are scheduled to play their first game on CBS in Week 10 at 4:25 Eastern Time in the afternoon, and also their second matchup will come in Week 17, this time on Fox. It's the first time this matchup will be on CBS since 1993 on Halloween, so that is a little bit different, because if you do pay attention to how the games are laid out on the networks and everything like that, it's usually NFC games, NFC and NFC opponents playing on Fox, usually in the afternoon, and it's usually the AFC games put off to CBS in the early window or also in the afternoon window. For this game to be on CBS is noteworthy, and it is something that I will touch on in just a few seconds, but the NFL Executive Vice President of Media Distribution, Hans Schroeder, explained a little bit of the reasoning why these two teams aren't playing on primetime this season, to which he said, "I think it's important to remember the biggest window of our week typically is the 4:25 game, so people tend to gravitate just to primetime as being this additional level of exposure, but 4:25 is every bit as big a window for us," and that was pretty surprising. I didn't necessarily agree with that statement, but that is, according to Hans Schroeder, the executive vice president of media distribution, how the NFL is sort of feeling with the afternoon window. And I know the afternoon games usually are deemed America's game of the week, but again, it didn't really sit well with me. I don't really agree with that, but the NFL contracts, in addition to them not having this game on prime time, are sort of starting to become a bit more flexible in terms of what team plays on what network and stuff like that, alluding back to the fact that I mentioned the AFC games are usually on CBS and the NFC versus NFC games are usually on Fox. But this year, CBS can now show NFC versus NFC games, alluding back obviously to the Eagles and Cowboys being on CBS in Week 10, and also Fox likewise can show AFC versus AFC games now too. Before, it was the other way around, and there's still the possibility that both can be flexed into the primetime slots. If they both have great records and the primetime game originally scheduled isn't really one that a lot of people want to watch, maybe they'll flex it into that spot. That is always still a possibility. But for right now, they are not on primetime as it stands. And it makes you think back to that topic I mentioned in last week's episode about the New York Jets getting 6 primetime games in the first 11 weeks. 7 standalone games for the Jets as well, including their London games. So, if you really are upset about it, couldn't they just fit into one of them and you could take one away from the Jets? I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be upset with 5 primetime games in the first 11 weeks instead of 6. But, again, that's just how the NFL figured out their schedule. They felt that the Jets sort of owed them one, like I mentioned last week. So it is what it is right now at this point. Again, like I mentioned, there is always that possibility it could change, but this sort of points more towards the question on hand now, with this being the case in 2024. Is it a big deal that the Eagles and Cowboys are not on prime time this year? In simple terms, I think it is a big deal. I think it does catch a lot of people's eye again because this is a pretty chippy game, especially over the last few years, with both teams being very well, both on offense and on defense. The kind of personalities you have on both sides, Micah Parsons, Trayvon Diggs, A.J. Brown, Smitty. Now you have Saquon also jumping over to the Eagles and playing against the Cowboys, who back when he was a Giant probably has some bad feelings towards the Cowboys because they couldn't beat them when he was with the Giants. So I'm sure he feels a sort of type of way towards the Cowboys. So you have that also added on to it. On the defensive side, Brandon Graham, obviously, like I mentioned, Micah Parsons and stuff like that. So it is a trippy game. It is entertaining, and I just think it is a big deal to not have him on primetime because, back to me not agreeing with what Hans Schroeder said, it just seems, I don't know, like logical that the primetime game is always the bigger one for me because of the fact that there's no other game on television. Primetime, really, if you're trying to watch a game, if it's Sunday and you're still, have that itch to watch more football, that there's a late game on and you don't have really any other option but to watch that game, so it draws in more people. At the 425 window, you usually have America's Game of the Week plus 3 other games, so if it's not really a game that you're really interested in, you could click off of it and go to another game. That's why when he said that the 425 game is usually their biggest game, it didn't really correlate with me for that reason. There's other options, so people can just click off of the game if they don't like it. When it's on prime time, they don't have any other option if they really want to watch football to watch that game, so it just made more sense to me in that way. But this is just pointing more towards the idea, the avenue, that the TV packages will be cut up even more, distributed a bit differently than they have in the past, usually in the regular season and the playoff games. It points towards the idea that they could be sold separately in the near future, near as in maybe 3 years, 4 years, or something like that. I don't anticipate it being next year, but in probably 3 to 5 years, we could see more of the playoff games, of the standalone big games being sold separately. The NFL would obviously make more money by selling these big games separately, and instead of them saying usually how it is, laid out on the usual plan and how the schedule works out, it usually is, the primetime games, the big games, like the ones on Fox, whoever's scheduled on Fox, Fox gets the NFC and NFC games. Usually all the NFC games are on Fox. So the big games, regardless of who it is, will just be on Fox at whatever time it is scheduled. By having them being sold separately, you can take one of those games that is usually on Fox and then flex it to a primetime game, give it to some other media company or other broadcasting network to broadcast it themselves if they offer up more money. If their bid is higher than the other networks, I'm sure the NFL will have no problem showing it on theirs. It is just another way to gain more revenue for the NFL. And that seems to be like the way that it is going, especially after the Netflix deal. It incentivizes other networks to sort of pay more for that marquee game to kind of take it away from other networks, especially on Christmas with Netflix, like I just mentioned. Netflix has both of the games this year. That is a guarantee, but going forward, they're only guaranteed one of them. So depending on what day Christmas falls on, it does incentivize these other networks to sort of bid on those games and give the NFL more money to stream or broadcast these networks. Instead of Netflix getting both of them, they're only guaranteed one in their contract. So one could be on Netflix, and whoever bids higher on the other game will end up getting. It's pretty genius, obviously, for the NFL to do this. It makes more sense for them to gain more revenue with more streaming platforms now taking their picks at it and sort of getting scheduled on odd days. On Friday with NBC and Peacock, you have the one on Christmas this year. Thursday game will be on Peacock as well, if I'm not mistaken, the kickoff game this year between the Chiefs and the Ravens. So it all can get mixed up like that as well. On Saturday, usually it falls to the NFL Network, but I think this year it will be a good amount of the games also will be on NBC. So how the NFL distributes these games, I think, will just point more towards the idea of them selling them separately to gain more money. And also, I just think we're going to see more of this going forward, this TV shuffling, these games being on Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays. Now that you've opened up the door to it, and if they perform very well and you get a great reception, there's no way the NFL will not try and make this a regular thing. You saw it last year with Christmas, how popular it was. Now I find it very hard to believe that they'll ever stop showing games on Christmas Day, regardless of what day it falls on. The only day that's safe right now is Tuesday, but the way that this is going, I don't anticipate the NFL staying away from Tuesdays anymore than they have to. If an opportunity presents itself to show a game on Tuesday, the NFL will have no problem on doing that. And maybe in the near future, we could have a game on every day of the week at some point in the NFL season. I don't think we're too far from that, and this is just sort of opening that door to that avenue in the near future. But for right now, the Eagles and Cowboys won't be shown on any of those primetime games. They will be reserved for the afternoon games, so let me know what you guys think about that, seeing that game in the afternoon slot. Is it a good idea? Do you hate it? Do you don't mind it? I personally don't really like it, but that's just me. But in saying that, we will move on with more topics on today's show. We have a couple more to get to regarding the schedules as well, starting off with the Steelers having a very difficult end of their 2024 season. I'll break it down for you guys after this break. And also, the Ravens unhappy with how their schedule panned out. Again, a few carrying over difficulties and just problems that they had with their season last year and now carrying over to this year. They're not happy about it. I'll tell you all the reasons why after this break. We'll be right back in just a few seconds.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Before we dive into our next segment, I want to remind you guys one last time on today's show, If you have any questions or comments you want to make, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, that you see on your screen. By using that link, I'm able to see your question pop up in my chat box. I'll read it out loud and on air, obviously, and just get your guys' perspective and point of view on anything I say or any of the topics we talk about. It's a massive help for this show. So again, if you would, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, with any questions or comments that you may have throughout the rest of today's episode. But in saying that, we'll move on and continue on with more schedule talk, carrying over from last weekend, obviously from the last segment, focusing in on the Pittsburgh Steelers schedule in 2024. I mentioned it before when I had my reaction to the schedule, how the Steelers have the third hardest schedule in the NFL, just behind the Baltimore Ravens and the Cleveland Browns. And it is very difficult towards the end of the season. If you haven't heard anybody else talk about it, the end of the Steelers schedule is very difficult, and I thought I'd come on here, lay out the groundworks, the facts of the schedule, and then we'll talk about the question on hand that now is generated from such a difficult schedule. Will this be the Steelers' first losing season under Mike Tomlin? It does have a good case for being it. I won't lie to you guys. This schedule, just in terms of the facts of it, the Steelers will have 10 games against teams with a winning record. Only 2 of the first 8 games that are on their schedule are against winning record teams, so a lot of those difficult games are already pushed towards the back end after their bye week in Week 9. The only teams with the winning record that they play in their first 8 games are the Colts in Week 5 and also the Dallas Cowboys. And moving on with that, 4 of their first 6 games are also on the road. So even if 2 of the 8 games were only teams with winning records, 4 of them of their first 6 are on the road. So you look at games against the Falcons is on the road, at Denver, at Indianapolis, and at Las Vegas. Teams with not winning records, but they're on the road regardless, so there's always a level of difficulty with that. And looking at it, you play the Jets at home also, and with the Atlanta Falcons as well. Yeah, they had losing records, but they didn't have proper quarterback play, to say the least, in 2023. So now the Steelers will essentially play Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, and Anthony Richardson with the Indianapolis Colts. Even though they lost to the Colts last year, now they'll get even better with having their starting quarterback in there. So that is also tougher. Now you look at their schedule after their Week 9 bye. They'll play on the road against the Washington Commanders, and then they'll face the Baltimore Ravens and the Cleveland Browns over a 5-day period. They'll host the Baltimore Ravens in Week 11, and then they'll travel to Cleveland for that same week Thursday game. So they'll play on Sunday, and then just a few days later, we'll play on Thursday at Cleveland. And on that topic, they won't play their first divisional game until that Week 11 game against the Baltimore Ravens. And after that, they'll play 4 consecutive AFC North games. So you start with the Ravens, and then Week 12, Week 13, and Week 14 are all filled up with AFC North games. That's something I've really never heard of. Playing your first divisional game until Week 11 is pretty ridiculous, especially talking about the AFC North and how all those teams are in playoff contention. Any of those teams are capable of making the playoffs. So to have it stacked up there towards the end, when you're already playing a lot of other tough teams in the back half of the season, is extremely difficult, but it is, again, how the schedule panned out for the Steelers. But also moving on with more on their schedule. Starting in Week 15, the Steelers will play 3 games in a 11-day period. They'll play at Philadelphia on December 15th. Then they'll play at Baltimore on December 21st before hosting the Kansas City Chiefs just 4 days after that on Christmas. So not only do they have limited rest, they play at Philadelphia. That got even better this offseason. At Baltimore, which is always tough, obviously, and they'll host the reigning Super Bowl champions, Kansas City Chiefs, on Christmas Day. All 3 of those teams had a combined 35 wins in 2023, so hard to think that they'll be worse than they are or than they were in 2023. And also, their final 8 games are against teams with a winning record. The Washington Commanders would be the last opponent they play throughout their season without a winning record. Even Cincinnati had a winning record of 9-8 last year, but they'll be the only team that they play in their last 8 games that didn't make the playoffs. So not only will they be playing their final 8 games against winning record teams, but all of them except the Bengals made the playoffs. So that just adds on even more to it. And I mentioned their Week 11 game is the first time they play their divisional opponents. So that's 6 divisional games of their final 8 games being against the AFC North. So if you break it down a little bit here, of their final 8 games, 6 of them will be divisional games, AFC North opponents, and the other 2 that won't be divisional games are against the Eagles and the Chiefs. So in that period, if you really think about it, you play Deshaun Watson twice, you play Lamar Jackson twice, you play Joe Burrow twice, you play Jalen Hurts, and you play Patrick Mahomes. An unbelievable gauntlet there to end the year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And not to mention, on top of that, they have a new offensive coordinator, essentially new left and right tackles, trying to figure out the wide receiver position. You obviously have new quarterbacks in there to try and get used to the team. Not the recipe you'd want to have to think that you would make the playoffs or have a winning record this year. But I'm here to tell you that they will have a winning record. They will have a winning record, and they will not finish last in the AFC North because the Ravens and the Browns also have extremely tough schedules. That's one thing. But also, it can't get worse than it was last year in 2023. If you didn't watch any of the Steelers games, good for you, because they were awful. The quarterback play, I don't have to speak on much of it on this episode. That was really the national news around the Steelers, trying to figure out their quarterback play, bringing in Mitchell to replace Kenny Pickett. Then Mason Rudolph comes in because Trubisky isn't good enough. And in totality, all 3 of those quarterbacks for the Steelers threw a combined 13 touchdowns between all 3 of them. 13 between all 3 of them, I think. And they had 13 interceptions. So you have 13 touchdowns from 3 quarterbacks on your team and 9 interceptions. Not a great ratio for one quarterback. To say it was all 3 is absurd, ridiculous. It can't get worse than that with Russell Wilson coming in and Justin Fields. Russell Wilson, statistic-wise, just had a better year than all 3 quarterbacks combined, so that's one thing. With the competition of Justin Fields, I'm not saying both of them, whichever one starts will be in contention for making the All-Pro team or anything like that, but again, it just can't get worse than it was last year. And also, new offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, it should fit into their idea of trying to run the ball even more, which is something that they wanted to do. They've addressed some issues with that, drafting an offensive lineman in the first 2 rounds this year in Zach Frazier, and I can't believe I forgot the first round pick's name. It'll come to me, but they drafted 2 first in their first 2 picks in the draft. They drafted offensive linemen, they drafted a wide receiver, and also it is sort of funneling into that idea of trying to run the ball, being this nasty, winning both sides of the ball sort of team with the Steelers. And also looking back on it last year with how bad they played, they finished 5-1 against the AFC North. And I know Deshaun Watson, people will say, got hurt. Joe Burrow wasn't there. Obviously, that's a valid reason, Joe Burrow not being there. But against the Ravens as well, they beat them twice. They beat the Bengals twice, and they lost to the Browns in one of the games. So, again, as bad as they were, they had a good record against the division last year, and it will be difficult to make the playoffs with how good the Jaguars are. Maybe in there, the Bengals having an easier schedule than the other 3 teams in their division is something to point out to as well. So they are stacked against them. The odds are stacked against them. You have the New York Jets as well with Aaron Rodgers coming in, hopefully playing the entire season healthy. It won't be easy, but again, I have reasons to believe that it can't get any worse than it was last year. They have better quarterback play. I have to believe it can't get worse than 13 touchdowns and 9 interceptions between three guys than what it is that they have now. It's going to be hard. It's probably not going to be pretty at a lot of points in the season, but they won't have a losing record. And if they don't have a losing record and they beat some of these very challenging teams throughout the duration of their schedule, I have to believe that has some pedigree or that holds some value for them to make the playoffs if by week 12, week 11, when they start that extremely tough portion of their schedule, if they're in a good place, if they carve out a good window or margin of error there for themselves, I think they'll give themselves the chance, as they always do year after year under Mike Tomlin. It isn't anything new. The conversation will be had over and over again throughout the offseason, but that's how I feel on it. If you haven't really looked at the Steelers' schedule, I recommend doing so and getting a better understanding of how difficult this will be. But again, they will not have a losing record in 2024. You can quote me on that. We'll come back to this episode and I'll say I told you so. But for the remainder of this of today's show, we will go to the last break on today's episode, and when we come back, we'll talk about more schedule details, this time with the Baltimore Ravens and how they're not satisfied with how their schedule panned out. So stick around. We have one more segment to talk about on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to wrap up today's last segment, I should say, with the final segment being more scheduled talk on the AFC North. Funny enough, I just finished talking about the Steelers and how hard their end of schedule is in 2024, but it was actually the Ravens who kind of spoke out about being upset about their schedule. It seems like the NFC, the entirety of the NFC, except Cincinnati, aren't happy with their schedule or have very good reasons not to be happy with the schedule. I mentioned Cleveland, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh have the three toughest schedules in the NFL based on opponent win percentage from last season. And sort of how the Ravens got to this point and why they are or have reason to be upset is for a few reasons that I listed out on here. They have a late bye week. Which is one thing, which is probably my biggest issue with their schedule. On top of having tough opponents and the second hardest schedule in the NFL, their bye week doesn't come until week 14, which is nuts. I didn't even think it could go that late, but apparently it can, and that's when the Baltimore Ravens will get a break from all the action that an NFL season comes with. Both of their Monday Night Football games are on the road, so that's something else that isn't ideal. 3 of their 5 primetime games are also on the road. Again, not something you would want planned out if you were making your own schedule. And also, they only have 4 days rest, similar to the Pittsburgh Steelers, between December 21st against the Pittsburgh Steelers and their Christmas Day game at Houston. So not only do they have little rest, the second game will be at Houston, traveling across the country to the state of Texas to play a very good Houston Texans team, a conference opponent, I should say, as well. So, again, not ideal for the Ravens. And also, lastly, They will face a league-high 10 opponents that made the playoffs in 2023. The last 3 opponents on their schedule are the Steelers, made the playoffs obviously, the Texans, and the Cleveland Browns as well. So, again, not ideal for the Ravens. They have voiced their displeasure a little bit to CBS NFL insider Jonathan Jones, who reported on the Ravens' issues a little bit, and he sort of dug deeper into what was said from the Baltimore Ravens by saying, they note that they are going to play 22 Monday Night Football games in the John Harbaugh era, with 18 of them being on the road. They note that 3 of their 4 October matchups are going to take place on the road this year, at Cincinnati, at Tampa, and at Cleveland. And Jonathan Jones went on also to mention how the Baltimore Ravens noted that they'll be playing on Christmas for the 4th time in franchise history, which is pretty remarkable, pretty odd that they keep track of that themselves, the Baltimore Ravens. It is their 2nd consecutive game on the road on Christmas. Also another weird thing that they keep track of, but it is something that they hold not in the most positive of light with the NFL, 2nd consecutive year on a holiday that they are on the road. Traveling pretty far as well. Again, last year they traveled to the 49ers, if I'm not mistaken, and now again a cross-country trip to the Houston Texans. And also, it's the first time in league history that a team has played on the road on consecutive Christmases. So, some pretty odd and unique facts being dug up here by the Baltimore Ravens, but, it is kind of funny to poke fun of it for them digging it up a little bit and being so particular with some of these things that are true. But they have some room to be upset about this, with Baltimore also having some holes to fill on their offensive line after some of their starters moved on. Derrick Henry will be there, along with Lamar Jackson, obviously bringing Derrick Henry in. So they'll have a good chance in most of these games. I'm sure they're favored in a lot of these games, but is it fair for the Ravens to be unhappy with their schedule? I think they have reason to be. I think with all the things that I listed out on here and how they communicated it a little bit to CBS NFL insider Jonathan Jones, I think there is some room there to be upset about it. The AFC North just got killed this year with how these schedules fell, except the Cincinnati Bengals, which is pretty crazy. I know there is some room there to kind of give out to the Bengals for going through last season without their starting quarterback. So I guess you could kind of give them a little bit of leverage there, a little leeway to get an easier schedule. But they have, I think, the 16th easiest schedule, or the 16th hardest schedule, in the NFL. Compared to the Ravens, Steelers, and Browns getting the top 3, I think that's a pretty big discrepancy there. But it is what it is. My biggest issue with the Ravens, if I was a Ravens fan and I saw the schedule, is that Week 14 bye. Then you play, after Week 14, you have those 3 games left. Like I mentioned, against the Steelers, the Texans, and the Browns. Playoff implications, I'm sure, will be held in those games. Seedings and things like that. How maybe you have a contention spot to win the AFC North. Coming right off of the bye into those 3 games is certainly not easy. And how late it is just sort of raises the risk of getting injured in those 14 consecutive weeks that you have to play football. It's unheard of. I don't think I remember a bye week being this late, or maybe I just haven't been paying attention to whichever team had it this late. But for the Ravens to get it, I think it is my biggest issue, certainly with this schedule for the Ravens. There's a lot of travel, too, in certain points, and also quick turnarounds with the Ravens schedule as well. Not ideal, again, if you're trying to rest up, trying to feel any sort of comfortability in your journeys throughout an NFL schedule. To have quick turnarounds and a lot of travel isn't ideal for these players. And also, it makes it a lot harder for the Ravens to repeat, obviously, as that number 1 seed, as that division champion, with Cincinnati having one of the easier schedules in the NFL. You anticipate Joe Burrow being healthy the entire season and how talented they are regardless. They still finished 9-8 last year. Now you add Joe Burrow back into the mix. I'm pretty sure they're would be or they should be the favorites, at least at this point, to win that division. They have good reason to. Like I mentioned, the talent and everything like that. Every time Joe Burrow plays most of the regular season healthy, they get to at least the AFC Championship games. So for the Ravens to repeat as champions, it will be tough with with the way the schedule laid out. But I think they have the best chance out of anybody to do it. The Bengals, Deshaun Watson, I'm not really convinced by him yet how that offense looks as well. They have a great defense, but offensively, if your quarterback's not there, you do struggle to win. The Steelers, new quarterback, trying to figure out the offensive line, same deal with them. The Ravens have the best chance because you have Lamar Jackson, you bring in Derrick Henry. That defense is still formidable, and offensively, it's not like you need a bunch of playmakers with the sort of running style that Lamar Jackson and the Ravens like to run. So they have a great chance of doing it, but it's going to be extremely hard, and I share in their ill feelings towards the NFL on how hard they made their schedule, as well as the Pittsburgh Steelers schedule. But we're going to be in store for a lot of great games with these schedules being as tough as they are, but they will produce a lot of great games. I'm looking forward to it a lot. Football season can't come soon enough, but that'll do it for today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I would like to give a huge thank you to you guys for tuning in to today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as the entire network as well. Make sure to follow us on other social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube for YouTube Shorts that are posted every day. All the live shows are recorded and posted on both of those channels, as well as individual segment videos. If you don't have time to watch a whole show and want to watch a certain segment, you can do that, and they're all on both channels as well. As a reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and just football in general discussions with me, Manny Maradiegue, as your host. Thanking you guys once again for joining me, and I'll see you guys all back here again with me tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.